Monster news out of UFC 254 from Fight Island. We'll get to that in a moment. Khabib Nurmagomedov putting his lightweight championship on the line against interim champ Justin Gaethje. Nurmagomedov a perfect 28-0. Gaethje coming off the biggest win of his career, beating Tony Ferguson at UFC 249 in May by 5th round TKO. To Fight Island we go. It's afternoon in the U.S. It's nighttime in Abu Dhabi. Here we go. Undefeated UFC lightweight champ Khabib the Eagle Nurmagomedov looking to extend his perfect record to 29-0. Justin the Highlight Gaethje looking to ruin everybody's day. Round one, Khabib put the pressure on Gaethje, shoots for the takedown and gets it. Highest striking rate in UFC history for Justin Gaethje. Moments later, Khabib working for the armbar, but he runs out of time as the round ends. In his corner, telling him to slow it down. In round two, Khabib shoots for another takedown, gets Gaethje to the mat. After the takedown, Khabib would transition to a triangle choke. In just a matter of time, Gaethje would tap, and he goes to sleep. And that is it. In round two, Khabib Nurmagomedov defeats Justin Gaethje and wins the lightweight championship, retaining the title via second-round submission. Now, Khabib very emotional post-fight, fighting with a heavy heart after the passing of his father in July due to COVID-19 complications, leaving his gloves in the octagon, retiring, going out on top. He said he's not fighting without his father. He gave his mother his word that this was his last fight. Khabib Nurmagomedov retiring, walking away on top one last time as the champion. Again, second round submission to improve to 29-0, 13-0 in UFC as he retains the lightweight championship. And what a career it was. Khabib Nurmagomedov, one of the best to ever do it. Here's a look at the winning wagers. Khabib on the money line via submission paid plus 190, and not to go the distance was at minus 225. But what bombshell news here. Khabib Nurmagomedov calls it a career. Here's Dana White with his reaction.
He is one of the toughest human beings on the planet, and he's the #1 pound-for-pound fighter in the world, and seriously, you have to start putting him up there at GOAT status with, you know, whoever else you think is the GOAT.
Dana White there reacting to the news. Khabib Nurmagomedov, 13 straight UFC wins, ending his career a perfect 29-0. And there was talk that maybe he would fight at least one more time, get to the milestone of 30-0. But clearly that's not important to him. What's important is he goes out on top. Lightweight champion Khabib Nurmagomedov, a perfect 29-0. All right, let's welcome in CBS Sports combat analyst and co-host of Morning Combat, Luke Thomas and Brian Campbell. We'll get to the fight in a moment here, but the bombshell, the big-time news, Khabib Nurmagomedov calling it a career. Luke, your reaction is what?
You'll probably never see another fighter like Khabib Nurmagomedov ever again. 29-0 in arguably the toughest division in the entire sport, not merely in the Ultimate Fighting Championship, but globally. If you go to any organization that has a few divisions, almost without any debate, their lightweight division is going to be their toughest. He goes undefeated in that with the UFC for 8 years. That was his run there. He didn't even get knocked down or cut in his entire time in all of professional mixed martial arts. You literally cannot say that about any other, not just UFC, Pride, Strikeforce, any other high-level champion in the history of the sport. Not one. He is the only one you can say that about. He goes out probably as the best pound-for-pound fighter currently alive right now. And there is some debate about the totality of his resume. Did he have enough of it there in terms of all of his contemporaries relative to, say, a John Jones or an Anderson Silva or a George St. Pierre? But in terms of the distance between himself and his contemporaries, you will never see another fighter like Nurmagomedov again. I'm sad to see him go. I suspect his retirement might be legitimate. Sometimes in the sport, these guys come back 18 months later. This one feels like it might be the real deal Holyfield. Either way, though, he is a fighter without precedent. He is a fighter without peers. That's the best fighter on the planet, folks.
Yeah, if you're not a day-to-day, week-to-week mixed martial arts fan, you got to understand something about this sport and why losses don't matter. It's completely dangerous. There are so many ways to lose at any given time, whether you're elite or not. One mistake can cost you a fight by submission, by knockout, by corrupted decision, on and on. Here's a guy who navigated those waters, as Luke said, and lost just one round in 13 UFC fights, typically against the very best in the world. And let's not forget as well, he's the unbeaten champion in the deepest and most dangerous division in company history. You'll talk about his dominant wrestling ability. Not enough people will talk about how well-rounded his game became as his career went on. And certainly this victory over Gaethje was a showcase of that. But let's also look at his intangibles. He comes from the Dagestan area in Russia. He's all business all the time. He's tough as nails and unflappable, no matter what was going on inside or outside the cage. And even further, as we found out from Dana White saying after this victory, that he may have had a broken foot and multiple broken toes suffered in the week building up to this fight. Unshakable, unmistakable, perfect. You're going to compare a career this rare to someone like boxing's Floyd Mayweather. Khabib did it his own way, and maybe it's even more impressive when you consider in UFC, the best always face the best.
BC, you know Khabib, one of my favorite guys to watch, just the technical style that he had, the way he grinded, the way that he was almost perfect when he got into the cage. I mean, it was incredible. Really, you have to respect and appreciate what he did over his career, 29-0, but he walks out on top. And how about the way that he goes out, putting Justin Gaethje to sleep in the second round, BC?
Look, this was a showcase, as I said, for all the credit we give him as a wrestler. His submission game was on point today. His chin was incredible. The pressure he put on Gaethje and the threat of those takedowns in round one saw a dangerous striker in Gaethje, a guy who I said, if anybody can beat Khabib, it'd be him. And it reduced him to wild swings, sucking wind, and really not looking like the fighter we'd seen in previous fights. Luke nailed something which is key. Despite being 29-0, despite being perfect in 13 UFC fights, injury and other sort of bad luck scenarios, right? 5 fights against Tony Ferguson that was booked but never happened. If there's any lament, it's the fact that we didn't get to see Khabib against everybody in his division, in his era. But the final 3 fights that he did give us, Conor McGregor, Dustin Poirier, Justin Gaethje, all 3, you could have made a case of why you could have favored them to upset Khabib, why their style was perfect to maybe finally give him a challenge. He completely dominated all 3. In fact, at certain points, he made all 3 look like regular, average fighters. That is incredible when you talk about somebody who, when the lights were the brightest, when it mattered most, he was able to raise his game. Luke said it. I'll repeat it. You may never see another fighter exactly like him, from dominance to what he has inside, the intangibles. What a great career.
You know, it's amazing. We live in a moment in time where the sport has more well-rounded fighters than ever. Most of the high-level fighters have pretty good striking, pretty good wrestling, pretty good jiu-jitsu, and it may be excellent in one direction or the other, but they have all of their bases covered. And the best practices relative to even 5 years ago have totally changed. The kick location on leg kicks is different now. Timing is better. Setups, feints, the whole 9 yards. Fighters are just much better and much more well-rounded. And then here comes a guy like Nurmagomedov and says, everyone's going that way. I'm going to go this way. I'm going to wrestle everybody. I'm going to be not one-dimensional. I think he had two and a half dimensions to him. But he wasn't trying to be an everyman. He just decided, I'm going to pick 1, 2 things, and I'm going to be better at it than everyone. And he was. Justin Gaethje finished via submission. Dustin Poirier finished via submission. How about Conor McGregor? Finished via submission. Ally Quinta, who he took on 24 hours notice, dominated with several 10-8 rounds, and you just showed it. Michael Johnson finished with a submission. This guy is untouchable, almost quite literally. I've never seen anything quite like it. The only note I would add is Justin Gaethje was noted for having very good takedown defense. That got challenged here a little bit. But the big hole in his game was, and I'd heard this in the training room about him from folks who had been in the gym with him, is that he just didn't spend a lot of time working on his jiu-jitsu, not a lot of time working on his mat wrestling, right? And it showed up here big time. Yes, getting the fight to the floor was not necessarily all that easy for Nurmagomedov, although he did it. But once he did it, it went from 0 to 60. The gap there was enormous, and Khabib got his hand raised.
BC, what does this mean for the lightweight division as a whole?
It's going to mean big business because although you're taking out one of your biggest stars, a guy who got the rub from Conor McGregor in 2018, so to speak, in the biggest selling pay-per-view in UFC history, he's out. And I do believe, by the way, that he'll stay out. He's a man of conviction in his words. But what Khabib has left behind, though, star-studded. You're talking about Conor McGregor, Dustin Poirier, Tony Ferguson. Look at that top 10 list up and down. Nothing but big names. And oh, by the way, UFC just signed former 3-time lightweight champion in Bellator MMA, Michael Chandler, who fits in well here. I think because of the rumors and we've seen the public negotiations that Dustin Poirier and Conor McGregor could be headed toward a January rematch, there's no reason why that may not end up having a vacant title at stake. So the division will go on as fine, just fine, as planned. You'll see big fights. You'll probably see great fights. But in some ways, you may see that title bounce around a little bit. This may end up looking like the famous light heavyweight division within UFC more than a decade ago when it was Chuck Liddell, Rashad Evans, Rampage Jackson, Machida, Griffin, Hall of Famers just taking turns wearing that belt. Sometimes it takes the legend walking away, which Khabib did on Saturday night, for the others to have their moments. I don't think anyone, though, for as great as those names are, can be close to this level of dominant.
Yeah, I mean, it creates chaos, but maybe the good kind of chaos. I mean, it's never good when a champion has to hand back a belt to the division. Like when St. Pierre walked away and goes, well, none of you jabronis can take it. Here's your belt back. You can fight over for the things that you couldn't take from me now that I'm just giving it back to you. John Jones did the same thing at light heavyweight, and now Nurmagomedov at lightweight. So it's always better when there's this transference of power, when somebody can beat the person who is the man and then become that themselves. So in that sense, it's not great. But BC really highlighted the reality here. This is a very, very stacked division. And without Nurmagomedov as the specter hanging over it all, there's a lot of competitive fights that could go a lot of different ways. McGregor could be champion again before you know it, or maybe Tony Ferguson does it, or maybe Paul Felder finds a way, or maybe Michael Chandler finds a way. The UFC is going to have their hands full in creating just the right matchups, and I do think BC's right. That title might bounce around a little bit, but if there is any division that can withstand the kind of harm that can be caused it when the champion just gives the belt back, lightweight. Lightweight is a very, very deep division. They've got the resources, I think, to still keep fans intrigued, build stars, and have some fun fight nights.
We know we're going to see Justin Gaethje once again, BC. What should he take away from this fight? What will he say that, I learned this from that fight against Khabib Nurmagomedov?
That maybe there's still more work to be done. That, Justin Gaethje has had an incredible turnaround in the past 2 years from all action, maybe MMA's answer to Arturo Gatti, to a guy who's a legitimate title contender. He's certainly refined his striking game, but it's one thing that we said leading up to this fight. Here's a guy with a great wrestling background. He never really uses it, though, in the cage. Certainly not from an offensive standpoint. As Luke laid out there, you saw how easy he succumbed when it did become a ground game. If he wants to compete with those other names, hey, this division's so closely packed again. He could be wearing the belt in a year for all we know, but there's certainly more work to be done to really set aside that it's his division now with him being gone. I'm sure, like we said, 5 or 6 guys believe that as we move forward.
I mean, here's the thing. I would disagree a little bit with that to my good friend and co-host, BC. And the reason why is, yes, it is true, as you saw, there is levels of improvement once you're actually on the mat that Gaethje could probably benefit from. Okay, fair enough. But point to me the person in that division who's going to take him down and keep him down. Maybe Michael Chandler, but Michael Chandler doesn't have the ground control that Khabib does, not even close. Plus, Michael Chandler just won his last fight and bought his ticket to the UFC by punching another guy's lights out. He likes to strike on the feet too. So it's like, okay, if I go and play one-on-one with LeBron James and I get dunked on for 30 minutes, what does that mean if he leaves the court and then it's just other dudes at the YMCA? Yeah, there's some holes in my game, but if you take that person out, I don't have to worry about the rest of these scrubs. So I think it is true that you could be in the corner of Justin Gaethje and say, yeah, no, we can tighten some of these things up. But I want to be clear about this. The biggest issue was his approach to the fight. He already tightened up a lot of that. That's how he got to this point. I still like his chances to either win a title or be in future title fights.
Back to the drawing board with Trevor Whitman. I'm sure they'll clean things up. A great analogy there, Luke, with the LeBron James. That puts it into perspective for a lot of folks. But what a bombshell piece of news here as Khabib Nurmagomedov, calling it a career, finishes at perfect 29-0, 13-0 in the UFC. All right, Luke, BC, sit tight. Let's show you what happened in the co-main event. #1 contender bout in the middleweight division between Robert Whittaker and Jared Cannonier. Dana White said the winner will get a title shot. Cannonier making his return after nearly a 15-month layoff. He's 3-0 with 3 knockouts since moving down to the middleweight division. Former middleweight champ Robert Whittaker coming off the win over Darren Till in July. In round 1, Cannonier connects with a leg kick, drops Whittaker to the mat. Then moments later, Whittaker connects with a stiff right hand, staggers Cannonier. Ooh, that was nice. And then in round 2, Cannonier going back to the leg kicks here with less than a minute to go in the round. Lands 2 hard ones, followed by a right hand. And Whittaker absorbing plenty of damage from the leg kicks. Early in round 3, Whittaker uses the leg, connects with a head kick. Cannonier in all sorts of trouble, drops, and Whittaker follows to the mat. Cannonier would somehow survive until the final bell in what was a very exciting fight in the co-main event. I mean, both guys at the end there. Former champ Robert Whittaker gets his hand raised, gets it done. Unanimous decision, sets himself up for a rematch against the man that took the belt from Israel Adesanya, as Robert Whittaker wins via unanimous decision. And how about that? Robert Whittaker on the money line at -105. Luke Thomas, Brian Campbell both picking Robert Whittaker to win this fight at -105 via decision, plus 225, and the fight to go the distance paid plus 120. All right, back here with Luke Thomas and Brian Campbell, who, as I mentioned, both picked Robert Whittaker to win this fight. Luke, I'll start with you. What impressed you about the way that Whittaker won this fight?
He had a bit of adversity up front. The judges scored at 29-28, which I'm not sure I necessarily agree with, but it does speak to how prepared and ready Jared Cannonier was for this opportunity. In particular, the leg kicks, which was something we identified on Friday could be one of his weapons. But just because you know someone's going to be potentially vulnerable to that doesn't mean they're going to be able to execute it. Early on, he was executing it. He was lighting up Robert Whittaker pretty well, staying far away, not letting him blitz on him. He just seemed to be doing the things that he needed to do. But what was so impressive in the end is that Robert Whittaker slowed the fight down, figured out what he needed to do, began to set traps with his footwork, with his fakes, with his feints. You see this combination here on the screen, but he was able to do. He had thrown that a number of times and it did not work. He's actually used it in previous fights as well, and then finally found the opening, getting Cannonier to fade over to his left side to avoid punches, and then landing the head kick, moving to mount at that point, right, really sealing the deal when he needed to. So what I really liked about it was Cannonier did not come into this fight overmatched. He was ready, but Robert Whittaker, maybe a little bit too hot against Israel Adesanya, losing his title. Goes into the Till fight. He wins, but it was a little too reserved. In this one, faced a little bit of adversity up front. It wasn't a perfect or flawless performance by any stretch, but this time he was able to open up, scored a knockdown, moved to mount, and in the end, there was no doubt he won. I think he bought himself another opportunity to rematch Israel Adesanya. It was great work from a guy who people thought he was done for after 2 wars with Yoel Romero. Robert Whittaker is not done for, still very much a force in that middleweight division.
Yeah, Yoel Romero, the ageless wonder, some would say. Dana White said the winner is going to get a title shot, so this sets up the rematch for the title against Israel Adesanya. BC, how do you think Whittaker has improved or evolved since his last fight against Adesanya 1 year ago?
I think he's improved greatly. And if anyone who didn't believe what they saw in that Darren Till fight because it was such a technical affair, I think Robert Whittaker went back in the closet and refound his championship form here. Yes, he faced some adversity. Oh, by the way, that's something we said coming in, that Cannonier was dangerous enough with a 3-fight win streak since coming to middleweight and scoring all knockouts that he was going to be in this fight until the final whistle. You saw that when he wobbled Whittaker late. But to see Whittaker bite down, be the better fighter from a technical standpoint, be faster, more powerful, drop the bigger fighter, and really put on a full clinic striking-wise, he shows you that he's ready to get back in there against Adesanya. maybe Adesanya is the man of this hour. Maybe this is his division and potentially his era. But I think what we saw in that first fight with how Robert Whittaker got finished, it was around a time where he admittedly was burnt out. He had come off those 2 wars. He had some health complications before that fight, which delayed his return. Now it seems like he's got it all back mentally, physically, and is going to give himself his best chance at least to try to regain that crown. Make no mistake about it. This is going to be a big fight, this rematch. Certainly down in the Oceanic region, Australia, New Zealand, where these are 2 homegrown stars more or less, although Adesanya obviously from Nigeria. But what you have right here are 2 stars, and I think Whittaker really hushed any of that concern. Still just 29 years old. He's going to be a wild and live out going in there against Adesanya.
Brian Campbell, Luke Thomas putting on a clinic here on CBS Sports HQ. Men, thank you. Appreciate it. And hey, for more awesome content from Luke Thomas, Brian Campbell, check out Morning Combat, spotlighting the biggest news from the world of boxing, mixed martial arts. Of course, they'll be breaking down the decision, the announcement by Khabib Nurmagomedov to call it a career. Plenty of perspective on the podcast. You can watch the series on YouTube as well. Listen to the podcast on Apple and Spotify. Download and subscribe today.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.